There is a plant sitting on ponds right now that produces more protein per acre than eggs, more than soybeans, more than any crop on the planet, and it doesn't need soil, fertilizer, or a single seed to grow it. It doubles in size every 2 days. It once cooled an entire planet, and in the United States, it is illegal to transport across state lines. If that sounds impossible, stay with me, because by the end of this you'll understand exactly why almost nobody knows this plant exists, and it's not an accident. Before we get into why it was buried, hit subscribe, because this channel is about to open more locked doors like this one. Picture a pond covered in what looks like green velvet. Tiny fronds, each no bigger than a grain of rice, cluster together in dense floating mats. From a distance it looks like moss. Up close, each one reveals rows of overlapping leaves stacked like tiny shingles. This is azalea, sometimes called mosquito fern. And inside every single leaf lives something extraordinary, a microscopic organism called Anabaena azalea, a cyanobacterium that has lived inside this plant, passed directly from parent to offspring, for over 100 million years. Unlike almost every other plant partnership in nature, this one is inherited. Neither organism can survive without the other anymore. And together, they do something that should not be possible. They pull nitrogen straight out of the air and turn it into fertilizer. No soil, no synthetic input, just water, sunlight, and air. The numbers are almost hard to believe. Soybeans, the gold standard for natural nitrogen fixing, produce around 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. Azalea produces close to 3 times that. A study in the Journal of the Science of Food and Agriculture put its protein content between 19 and 30% of dry weight. Whole eggs sit around 13%. Soybeans need fertile soil, irrigation, and a full growing season to hit 36%. Azalea needs a puddle, and it doubles its biomass every 2 to 3 days. Under good conditions, a single hectare can yield 9 tons of protein a year. Nothing else on Earth comes close. This isn't a new discovery. Travel back to Fujian Province, southern China, the year 540 CE. A scholar named Jia Sixi is compiling an agricultural encyclopedia, recording a practice that was already ancient in his time. Rice farmers growing a floating fern beside their paddies, turning it into the soil, and watching their yields climb with no other fertilizer needed. That's the earliest written record, but the practice goes back further. In northern Vietnam, entire villages built shrines to this plant. Wooden idols were carved in its likeness. Only a handful of families knew how to keep it alive through brutal summer heat, and they guarded that knowledge for generations, selling starter cultures to farmers who traveled from distant provinces. By 1973, Vietnam had built over 100 depots just to cultivate and distribute it, and 500,000 hectares of rice paddies were running on this living fertilizer, with yields up 20% or more. Modern science is only now catching up to what those farmers already knew. Researchers at Penn State published findings in 2024 on the Carolina strain, native to the eastern United States, showing protein digestibility around 78%, alongside vitamin A, vitamin B12, beta-carotene, iron, calcium, magnesium, and amino acid ratios that beat soybeans outright. Lead researcher Daniel Winstead described it as having a crisp texture and neutral taste, something you could eat raw in a salad, cook like spinach, or dry and grind into flour. A complete food that needs nothing but water to grow. But the story goes far beyond agriculture. 49 million years ago, during the Middle Eocene, the Arctic Ocean looked nothing like it does today. Palm trees lined its shores. Crocodiles swam in warm water. Global temperatures ran 8 degrees Celsius hotter than now, and atmospheric carbon dioxide sat near 3,500 parts per million, nearly 9 times today's level. The planet was locked in runaway heat. Then continental drift sealed the Arctic almost completely, ringed by Greenland, Europe, Asia, and North America. Heavy rainfall poured fresh water into the basin, forming a thin freshwater layer floating on the ocean beneath it, and that was all azalea needed. It spread across an area larger than India, turning the entire Arctic surface green. In 2004, a research expedition drilled into the seabed near the North Pole and pulled up cores stretching back 80 million years. Layer after layer contained nothing but fossilized azalea. At least 8 meters thick, possibly 20 or more, and the bottom was never reached. Scientist Henk Brinkhuis, now director of the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research, examined the samples and found hundreds of thousands of preserved spores. For roughly 800,000 years, the cycle repeated. Azala grew, pulled carbon from the air, died, and sank to an oxygen-starved seafloor where it couldn't decompose, locking that carbon away permanently. Carbon dioxide levels crashed from 3,500 parts per million to around 650, an 80% drop. Arctic surface temperatures fell from 13 degrees Celsius to below freezing. The poles began to ice over. Antarctica formed its first permanent ice sheet. One floating fern pulled the planet out of a runaway greenhouse state. Today, carbon dioxide sits near 420 parts per million and rising, and scientists estimate a single hectare of Azala Pond can capture over 20,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide a year. Researchers at the Climate Foundation and universities around the world are asking whether the plant that ended one climate crisis 50 million years ago might help with the one we're in now. So here's where it gets uncomfortable. In 1909, German chemists Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch figured out how to synthesize ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. It won Haber a Nobel Prize and reshaped agriculture worldwide. But it also built a $200 billion industry running on fossil fuels. Before the 1960s, Chinese farmers were using Azala on over 1.3 million hectares of rice paddies. Then synthetic fertilizer arrived, propped up by government subsidies and agricultural programs pushing modern inputs over traditional ones. Within a generation, Azala cultivation collapsed in China, in Vietnam, across South and Southeast Asia. By 2020, global nitrogen fertilizer use had doubled since 1970, and over half of everything applied never even reaches the crop. It leaches into groundwater. It runs into rivers. It turns into nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas roughly 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Every summer, a dead zone forms off the coast of Louisiana in the Gulf of Mexico, an area larger than 17,000 square kilometers where oxygen drops so low that fish and shrimp simply can't survive there. It's caused by fertilizer runoff traveling the length of the Mississippi River watershed, feeding algae blooms that suck the oxygen out of the water as they die and decompose. The United Nations lists these dead zones among the most serious environmental threats on the planet, and some now exceed 70,000 square kilometers, still growing. Meanwhile, the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service lists Azala pinnata on its federal noxious weed list, the same species Vietnamese farmers once built temples for, the same species documented in Chinese agricultural texts 15 centuries ago. It is now illegal to move across state lines. The official justification is that it forms dense mats that alter aquatic ecosystems, which is true. It grows aggressively and can change light and oxygen levels in a body of water. Those are real concerns. But notice the framing. A plant that blocks sunlight gets banned as invasive, while fertilizer runoff creates dead zones the size of small countries, and nobody calls that a threat requiring prohibition. It's a familiar pattern. White clover disappeared from American seed mixes once chemical companies started selling herbicides to kill it. Jerusalem artichoke got pushed aside despite out-yielding potatoes, simply because it couldn't be mechanized or monetized the same way. Azala joined that list, plants that work too well and cost too little to survive next to industries built on scarcity. But it never actually went away. In Tamil Nadu, India, a decades-long project has taught smallholder farmers to grow Azala in backyard ponds. Dig a shallow pit, line it with plastic, add a little water, soil, and cow dung for phosphorus. Introduce a starter culture, and within 2 weeks the surface is covered. Farmers harvest it daily and feed it to dairy cattle, and milk yields climb 15 to 20% while feed costs drop. Nobody's promoting this from the top down. It's spreading farmer to farmer because it works. In 2025, researchers in the Sagar River Valley showed Azala can replace a quarter of synthetic urea used while maintaining or increasing rice yields, and farmers reported lower costs and better food security. The same knowledge is now moving through Africa, the way it once moved through Asia. And it goes further still. Chinese researchers have shown that just 16 square meters of Azala can supply enough oxygen for 2 adults inside a closed life support system. NASA has studied related ferns for use in space colonies. Biosphere 2, the the sealed ecosystem experiment in Arizona, used azala as a protein source for fish and poultry. A plant that once grew wild on a warming Arctic Ocean might end up helping humans grow food somewhere far from Earth. 15 centuries of recorded use prove it works. Billions of people across Asia have eaten it directly or eaten animals raised on it. So we already know it's safe. Modern peer-reviewed research keeps confirming what farmers figured out on their own, so the science checks out too. The only real question left is who benefits when a free, abundant resource gets relabeled as a threat. Picture farm ponds quietly producing their own nitrogen. Picture smallholder farmers no longer at the mercy of global fertilizer prices. Picture protein grown from water and air with almost no environmental cost, and the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico slowly shrinking because less nitrogen is pouring off the land. That's not a hypothetical. That's what this plant already does, right now, on ponds and ditches across 6 continents, doubling every few days, waiting. If this is the kind of story you want more of, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more history has quietly buried, and we're just getting started digging it up.